Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could make it tonight on your Thursday night, 6 p.m. live, Planetary Health First, Mars Next. And we have a special guest, and she is no stranger to therapy. And she's probably been on both sides of the couch or whatever. That sounds bad, but she's probably had to have a lot of therapy, as in group sessions,
Yeah,
to learn
absolutely.
and give therapy. And so, anyway, when I'm not doing this planetary health, I am managing director of DeSanti, leading the healthcare division, and we love to find talent. I am always looking for great leaders, you know, at the VP level, senior level in healthcare, and I love what I do. So that's what I do when I'm not doing this. And Kathy is here. She's been 20 plus years as a licensed clinical social worker. And Kathy, before you introduce yourself, I'm going to just share, if people didn't know, this is the one time that we get to do behavioral health and you get to ask your therapist literally anything. So this is cool. We're going to learn a lot. And Kathy, just tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've been doing this work for several decades now, but the way that I started off is kind of funny because I didn't start off in the psychology realm. When I was in undergrad, I actually was most interested in just understanding, like, how do humans work? Like, what are we? Like, what does it even mean to be a person? And so anthropology was to me the path to understand that, because what that looks at is not just like the human as an individual, but human culture, human society. And so that's kind of where I started from. Eventually ended up becoming a clinical social worker because I really got fascinated by the idea of doing family therapy. I thought that's something that I could really do that would be fun, and I've pretty much been doing it ever since, but in all sorts of different roles. Right now, I'm a clinical supervisor with Brightview Health, which is an outpatient substance use disorder program where we serve mainly people with opiate use disorders, but also alcohol and other issues. But within that role, I help the counselors, the care coordinators, the operations folks. I work with all of them and try to help promote, a culture that will help people change, that will help people feel empowered. That is basically my role, is to kind of promote the vision of the company. And, I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm just speaking as myself. But, I've also run my own small company with a partner, who was a family therapist. And, basically our focus was on ensuring that people were getting, outcome, like that they were coming in and getting what they were looking for,
Mhm.
like we considered ourselves to be a, customer centric business where
Yeah.
if you go to a therapist, you should get benefit and you should know that it's working. And so that was always our focus.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Uh, People who've tuned in, please feel free to ask your therapist anything, any question you have regarding suicide, social media,
Hmm.
the opiate epidemic, what it is not, and we're going to talk later about how do I choose a therapist? And I love this one. How do you know if therapy's working? And then, like, if therapy ain't working, do I just not want to change? So, some really cool topics
Hmm.
we're going to talk about. And Kathy, you tell me tonight, you're the special guest. What is the biggest topic that you see that make mental health so difficult, or behavioral health? What is the biggest elephant, gorilla in the room or on our planet?
Okay, I have to have two, not just one, I guess. So the first one is that we tend to think of mental health care as a branch of healthcare. Okay. It really should be the other way around, because mental health is about who we are as humans and how we live together. Okay. And how we, make sense out of our lives and give our lives meaning. Really used to be that you would go to, a priest or a, grandma or whoever, and these days we hire people, to listen to us. Right. But, mental health is really the big picture. Right. And healthcare is one element of mental health. So if we think that, being mentally healthy is about finding the right treatment or getting the right diagnosis or whatever, we're kind of missing the boat a little bit. And so the way we try to deal with it is we try to put it into this medical model, or it becomes, a commodity that we sell and buy, right? And that's a technology that we are, that's the level of our technology right now in this kind of environment. But I've also been in other environments where that's not how things are done. And so I understand, what it is and what it isn't. It's a artifact of, the how we think about the mind and body and how they relate. And so we need to, understand that it's not the truth. Like if somebody tells you you've got, this or that disorder, or you need this or that or whatever, you got to be understanding that that is just a way of paying somebody to help you to, deal with whatever you're dealing with. That's not to say there aren't, psychiatric illnesses and stuff like that. But for the most part, what people are dealing with is, the culture and the families and the communities and the world that we're living in right now. That's why people are struggling. It's not because, when we say like, oh, 1 out of 3 people has a mental illness or whatever, like, what does that even mean? That should tell us there's something else going on here, right? So that's kind of the two sides of the coin. Is the way that we look at it is we kind of miss the big picture. And I forgot what the other part was. Sorry.
I guess just the big, to be honest with you, I forgot. So let's just move on. No, but I would, when I heard you talking, I immediately thought of the term carve out, like where mental health has its own little special category in healthcare called the carve out. Whatever they say about that is basically carve out from a therapist who's put up programs. What in the heck does that mean in English to someone who's not in this?
No freaking idea.
Okay,
I think
good.
that hurts my brain to even think about.
All right. Well, we'll go on to the next topic. We won't talk about carve outs because I
That's
think
okay. I think I used to know what that meant, but I think it's kind of like an older idea a little bit, that you would carve out just the mental health part and like contract with another. You know more about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to talk about that tonight. If someone below that's watching, that tuned in, just make a comment. What is a carve out in your business? If you're in behavioral health, Medicaid, those health plans. But today we're really fortunate to have our guest who knows how to lead, conduct therapy, to make sure that all the clinical protocols are going on, everything's happening. So we're really able to ask any question that we want. And one of the questions I'm curious to know is like, really, how do you know if your therapy is working or isn't working? And like, how long should you go on? I'm sure if you were a therapist, you'd like to see someone for the rest of your life and bill the insurance, right?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, I would not. I mean, I do not want to replace people's, support systems with a dependent relationship on somebody that they feel, they need in order to be able to manage their lives. No, my job is to help them to, feel more in charge and in control of their own lives and what their own goals are. So the idea isn't, in substance use treatment, yes, there is a correlation between how long you stay in treatment and how successful you are in recovery. Okay. But what that means is not as simple as it sounds, right? Because what that means is that people who are doing well are more likely to stay in treatment. Okay. But when you're talking about other kinds of issues, where, it's oftentimes better to not, stay on in long term.
Kathy, I like what you just said. You gave me some real insight. It's like, I'm just going to stop going to the gym. I look great, right? So you brought up a really good differentiation. Like, doesn't mean if you're in therapy all your life, you're really messed up, right? So it's, as a therapist, there's some detail there. You got to look at the facts. So thank you.
Is it helping?
I just learned something. You
Yeah,
taught me
I mean,
something.
if it's helping you to make progress towards your goals, then it's useful. Okay. There are times when, there might be people who do, have services that continue, for their lives, but that's very, very, very rare that that's what people need. A lot of times it's more about dealing with situations that come up and helping people to navigate them so that they don't end up having issues, where, their kid is acting out or their marriage is falling apart or they're, feeling like they can't get through the day without being high all day long or, whatever issues that we tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis. That's the idea. And then, therapy is like, it should really focus on, a particular goal that you're trying to reach. Like if you go to a therapist, you should know, like, what am I trying to get out of this? Am I trying to, find myself and like figure out what my next step is and get over some of my, fear of, success or my tendency to get into, dangerous relationships or suicidal behaviors, all of that, it's to recover and to, you know, to heal. It's supposed to help you to get better and to not need it anymore. That's the idea. So if you don't see progress, if you've been going to a therapist and you're not seeing progress, then you need to approach the therapist and tell them that you're not seeing progress, because we're so trained to want to pretend that to appease people, and so a good therapist is going to be able to set the tone where you don't feel like you need to make me feel good. I'm here to help you. Right. So you're going to be able to tell me if it's not working. So that's what I'm trying to do. The therapist can't tell you if therapy's working. You have to tell them.
I
Okay.
like that.
That's key.
So the client is typically always in control then.
They have to be. If I
Yeah.
mean, it's your life. How are you going to put somebody else in control of your life? That would be a problem,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
So what do you think of like the chat GPT and AI? There's a lot of trust in these things that what do you think? Is there any role with that in therapy? I mean, is that just all nonsense? Do you guys use any of these?
Once it becomes conscious, then sure. I'm
But
just kidding. I
yeah,
mean,
no,
sure,
that was good.
yeah, apps and stuff, like, you can
Yeah.
help yourself, and, like, a book is also, powerful too, but, it's not written by a human, but it's using human ideas, right? It's mushing them together, but, I mean, you can put in, like, a query, and you can probably get something that actually is valid, like, "What do I do if I'm depressed?" Well, the first thing you should probably do is try to exercise every day, right? I mean, it can probably tell you lots of helpful stuff. So, I mean, it sure could have a role, and maybe that could replace therapists if we're able to heal our social connections to each other, right? Then why would we need therapists anymore? Because, I mean, I'm kind of being a little bit blasé about it, okay? I understand that, it's a critical service, right? But what I'm saying is that, it's not a magic potion, right? It's somebody that's skilled in facilitating change, right?
So what do you do? It seems like we got a lot of conversation and during COVID, like over conversation about social isolation, all the mental health. It was great,
Exactly.
but has any good come of it? Like lasting? I mean, was it just like a soundbite for news organizations to have something to talk about? Tell us from your point of view some good that it came out of COVID. That you
Good that
see?
came out of COVID
I
is
mean,
that will be less.
with the conversation of mental health. I'm not saying, I just meant in general
Oh,
that you
no, I
see.
mean, there's probably lots of good that came out of COVID, because every major crisis is an opportunity to, evolve as a species, right? But it's also a risk, as you increase the risks, you increase the opportunities. But um, so yes, the conversation, like, we started to understand, okay, that mental health was not something that is caused by, you know, bad parents or, bad brains or whatever in general, right? I'm not saying that's never the problem, but typically what's going on is that, we're not connecting to a healthy environment. Okay. So the biggest factor that's going to affect you, and in fact, the biggest factor that affects drug use in general, is the social environment. Okay. Not the actual chemicals that are in it. Like I've spent a lot of time in, in South Asia where, the time that I was there, this was back in, a couple decades ago. I mean, I don't know if it's like this anymore, but I mean, if you go to if I went to a pharmacy and asked for, Valium, some 11-year-old kid would tell me, it's very dangerous. And here you go,
Mhm.
I mean, that's how, and yet they didn't have a huge problem with people getting addicted to these things, right? So you have to look at, the cohesion of the culture and the families. And so I lived with actually Tibetan families, one family in particular that kind of adopted me a little bit. And, I learned a different way of living. I mean, I lived with people who had survived, the most horrific thing you could possibly imagine, having another power come in and like take over your country and destroy your churches and monasteries and,
Mhm.
kill all your teachers and drive you out of your land and, try to destroy you as a people. And they didn't succeed, and that's a lot of trauma though,
Mhm.
I mean, and yet I didn't see the same kinds of, like psychological effects, that I would see, that I would expect to see in general, because there was so much, social cohesion. I mean,
Mhm.
families, just I learned how like families can just enjoy spending time together and just
Mhm.
be excited for that, and you
Mhm.
don't really need much to be happy. Like you can be sitting on a dirt floor drinking tea and, and you don't need a television. You don't need anything really, you know? And
Wow. So
so,
that's must have were you already practicing therapist, or was that that was when you were your anthropologist, right? I guess
well,
you
that
were.
was when I mean, I had a few lives, like that was when
Okay.
I was going to become a PhD in Tibetan Buddhism, but that
Yeah.
didn't happen because, I'm not a person that can spend my time in a library. Like I just need to be, out and about and interacting with people. And so that's how I moved into the social work field, because that's the kind of work that I was actually doing while
Hmm.
I was in grad school. So
Hmm. So that would have been anthropology, like social anthropology, like where you're understanding almost like sort of like sociology an element, or
kind of, yeah.
okay, understanding people and their cultures.
Yeah.
And okay, cool, cool.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually in a religious studies program at that point because I was at UVA in their Tibetan religion program. But before that, I was studying anthropology. And so, yeah, the first time that I lived with in the Tibetan community was when I was still an undergrad studying anthropology. And then I kind of continued from there. So, and then,
Interesting.
moved into social work. And
So
that's
I
kind of,
don't want to. I know you gave me some interesting topics. I know I love going. I think if we go down here on, this is great, and maybe we should stay here. But I'm just wanting to make sure we cover opiates and suicide. Those are the two
mhm.
things. Whichever one you want to go first.
Okay.
Um, but
Let's
it's.
start with the opiates because that's something that's like definitely on people's minds these days, right?
Mhm.
So, people probably have heard that the main cause of death right now for adults ages 18 to 49 in the United States is fentanyl overdose,
Mhm.
right? And actually, for under 18, it's firearms. So, we have a lot of things that are going on right now that are causing a lot of trauma, right? So, why are
Mhm.
people using all these drugs? Well, for one thing, it's because people were, they were flooding our communities, and nobody really understood them, and so a lot of people got addicted by their medical professionals who
Mhm.
didn't understand how they worked, right? And they thought they were safe to use long term, and once they figured it out, what they would often do is they would just cut people off and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to go to jail, so I'm not going to give you these anymore.
Mhm.
Like maybe we'll give you a little taper, but I'm sorry, you're on your own." So what did people do? They had to have them because opiates will make you very sick if you stop
Mhm.
taking them, right?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what got it going. And once, if you have a situation like, I'm sure a lot of people have probably heard about the classic experiment called Rat Park, where I forgot who actually did the study. I should have known that, but basically, when you put some rats in a box without much to do, and you give them a choice between, water spiked with cocaine or heroin or whatever, and regular water, they'll use the drugs until they die, right? But then they discovered that, if you put them in a community with other rats and interesting things to do and toys to play with, and I mean, rats are actually pretty intelligent, right? And none of them do that. I mean, they basically ignore it, And so,
Wow.
we saw the same thing when we, with the Vietnam War, when a lot of people were using heroin, right? A very high number. When they came back to the United States, many of them stopped and many of them didn't. And what was the difference? It had a lot to do with, what was the social environment that you came back into? Was it very bleak, and were there very few opportunities for growth and enrichment and other ways to, use your intelligence or whatever? Or was it, was it some place where you really didn't need that to, reintegrate? So
I'm hearing, Kathy, two big things that are driving addiction is trauma, lack of purpose, and then the social construct, the social environment,
social
and
connection.
social connection.
Yep.
And so how do we facilitate a better social connection amongst our population? And I would say it's different for a 13-year-old, for a 18-year-old, for a 25-year-old. I'm sure there's different risk groups. And then I think you also talked about earlier, what I would say is that Oxycontin, like that whole thing that drove this whole pharmaceutical, that was a whole nother thing. But tell me what you think would be, from a therapist point of view, the most important social, I don't want to say programs, but putting together things that could help people get that social engagement and whatever to keep them well and healthy.
Okay, so the first part of the question, can you remind me what you said?
So I guess really it was about, you were saying that it's, with the rats, you had the one rats that just took drugs and killed themselves, and then there were the other ones that were in a social environment that was conducive to living. They did okay. They were able to balance. So I guess from you being a therapist, what from the research and the studies, what it would be like the ideal kind of what that environment would look like where people would thrive, kind of reinstructing, reintegrating people back from
Like what went wrong, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we kind of know a lot of it has to do with, the most recent stuff, right? I mean, part of it, yes, was the opiates flooding the community, but also like it became easier and easier to disengage from each other. So what changed, in the last, I mean, we kind of know it was, we started to be able to escape into our devices, into virtual world. We started to spend a lot of time, in addictive behaviors rather than connection to each other. And, the very way that we connected to each other became almost addicted, right? Because you're scrolling through, Facebook rather than, talking to your neighbors, right? So, in our society, people have become far less likely to have a lot of close friends. They're far less likely to be involved in, community associations and different things like that, right? We spend a lot more time inside. Our kids don't really go outside and play anymore. We are constantly, our attention is being constantly, plied by people that are making money off of it. And so we're, given more and more extreme kinds of imagery, whether it's sexual imagery or violent imagery, right? Or, partisan politics, all of that stuff, right? I mean, we live in a culture that's, we've been always based on money and economic growth, and that's always been what drives us. And now we've gotten to the point where we have to figure out a different way, right? Because, at a certain point, you can't keep going. You can't keep just consuming and consuming, I mean, there's, you got to have a planet, you got to have, a way to live together. And, we just have gotten to the point where we have to figure out a different way. So basically, we've kind of gotten very isolated from each other. And
So Kathy, when someone enters treatment, I don't know personally. I've never experienced like, but like if I know that they take, like, it looks like from what I've seen, you take all your devices, your phone. Can you share with us a little bit, like when someone enters rehab and the process of kind of what someone would go through to recover? I would love you to journey on what that looks
Sure.
like as a therapist and help people know that might have family members or those who are in the
Yeah,
audience that might have been going through this or suffering from this. And then also I really want, we do a newsletter, so I'd love to have your contact information so
sure.
people can reach you, get help in any way, help family members, whatever we can do to provide, helpful resources, since you have been doing
Absolutely.
this so long.
So the first thing to know is that, there are many, many different ways of recovering. Okay. There's no one model that's going to work for everybody. And people might need and want different things at different times. So if you have a family member that's struggling with a substance use disorder, oftentimes, we get stuck and we don't know if should I try to control them or should I kick them out of the house or all these things. So I mean, get some help, get some advice, but approach them in a way of, you know, trying to help them to see what they want. Don't, because nobody wants to be, miserable and addicted to, opiates. Like nobody wants that. Nobody chooses to become an addict or whatever we want to call them or call ourselves. People, a lot of people use drugs and alcohol, right? And, nobody chooses to get addicted to them. So if you get addicted to a drug or something like that, then it's not because there's something wrong with you or you have an addictive personality or whatever, right? You're struggling with a condition. And, we live in a society where we look at that as being a crime. That is not a
Mhm.
crime. That's a problem that people have, and we need to be compassionate. And yes, we need to make it, illegal to do things like, drive under the influence or, sell cocaine to little kids or whatever. But,
Mhm.
we need to stop thinking about it as a crime to stamp
Mhm.
down on and understand that like that makes people afraid to get help. It makes people
Mhm.
so ashamed. I mean, the first thing that I have to do when I meet somebody in substance use treatment is like within the first 3 minutes, I want you to understand that like you can tell me anything. Never
Mhm.
going to judge you. Like I have
Mhm.
no dog in the fight. I am here for you, period. Like I see you as a person with, every, possibility. And, I don't see what you're struggling with now is defining you in any way whatsoever. I don't care what you've done and been through. Okay.
Kathy, we have a question from our audience. Are
Great.
you ready?
Yeah.
You want to bring it
Awesome.
on? All right. A good buddy of mine, Ben from graduate school, great guy, officer in the military, leading healthcare. Do you see a spike in youth crisis? What about the elderly? So that's a great question.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I would say, especially with youth, because youth they're scared. They don't understand what kind of world they're going to be living in, and a lot of them are not able to handle some of the influences that they're being exposed to. I mean, I didn't grow up on social media where there were all these like videos trying to encourage me to, starve myself or cut myself or whatever. So, I mean, you can just imagine, I mean, what they're having to navigate. And as adults, it's hard for us sometimes to help them if we haven't, we almost have to kind of learn from them in a weird way because they kind of get it a little more than we do, even though they're more impacted by it, if that makes sense. You
Yeah,
know,
no.
but as far as the elderly, yeah, absolutely, because the elderly are very much, and as far as elderly, I don't know when that starts. I could consider myself to be elderly, right?
Me too.
So, I mean, you're going to be more prone to getting addicted because you're going to be taking more medications. You're going to have more pain. You're going to have more, surgeries but I mean, our our doctors and nurse practitioners and medical providers, they're a lot more sophisticated. Like they understand now much better how to help you. We don't have always ideal like ways to, completely eliminate pain in every single case. But I always tell people, never give up and think I have to live in pain. Like medicine is constantly evolving, but it is tough. And elderly people do tend to become socially isolated. And especially during the pandemic, there's a lot of fear of getting sick and, dying, and people not wanting to be around you because they don't want to make you sick. So, and also we tend to not know how to like house and take care of elderly people because we don't have a culture that gives us the time to do that. And so we have to have it be a job, but we don't want to pay people unless they're not your family. And so we have all these weird ideas about, how to handle aging too.
I think what you bringing up, thought of another big issue, and I know a little bit because I'm in healthcare and I just see some stuff with AARP about what's huge is the under crisis, the unpaid caregiver burnout, that isolation, that nonstop.
Absolutely.
I just the other day, just realizing, my parents are elderly. But like the trauma, I guess you would call it, the burden that a spouse who's dealing with a loved one who has dementia. Can you imagine that? Here it is, your sunset years, you're 80 something, and then you're having to deal with your husband or your wife full time with that.
My dad just went through that, and I mean, he handled it amazingly, however, he had the resources to get, the right care for my mom. So that's really the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you don't have what you need and you have to rely on, the social safety net or whatever, we don't have the same like family ability to maneuver who can, you know what I mean? Like people have to be working, they have to go, to work every single day, and somebody's got to stay home and that person has to give up their, career or whatever. So
yeah, no, I love this. I'll read that's my job. So
sorry.
Ben, yeah, no worries. So Ben has asked another question. He's in the military, and he's just seeing a great deal of lack in the mental health resources to support our population. So he's asking you, what do you recommend as resources to bridge the gap? Are there some better than other resources? And so this is another good thing in our newsletter following up, recapping this, that you can kind of write some pinpoints. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are using these virtual platforms, these virtual therapy platforms, which are, very accessible. A lot of them do work with insurance and stuff. But, when you are looking for a therapist, it's about the particular therapist that you work with. You have to have a connection and you have to feel like, it makes sense what we're doing, that this is actually helping me. So there's that's making things easier for a lot of people. Sometimes like people can't find anybody that can, work with kids, or they can't, get a psychiatrist. So, your primary care providers are a huge, kind of fill-in option. Like a lot of times they can help people who, maybe need some medication or, some, just refer you to a counselor or whatever. I mean, if the resources that you mean is like having, different levels of care, like access to treatment facilities and stuff, I would say to work with your, whatever coverage you have, like, work with find out who's your care coordinator, talk with them, ask for help. So, look into, different support in your community, church groups,
I know there's like this, one of the churches, the church that I've been attending recently, they have this program called Recovery for Life. I don't know if it's faith-based, but regardless, I know AA is really a faith-oriented. To me, that seems like one of the most successful organizations.
It is a very successful organization. It has grown and, continued to grow and, has changed a lot of people's lives. So, all of these resources, there's a lot of free resources out in the community. And that's a good point, because support groups, things like that. Another big thing is like peer run recovery houses and things like that. Reach out to people in your community who are also, looking for help, and find out like what they're doing. I mean,
I bet you there's like some good Facebook groups. It seems like Facebook, sadly enough, the intelligence, the AI, it just digs up all that stuff you're searching, and they'll probably feed you the
Right.
groups. Unfortunately, HIPAA and all that, but I notice whatever I'm needing and looking for in my Google tends to be, in my feed. So I
Sure.
imagine there's some good groups there too,
Yeah, and a lot of people do take advantage of, support online. For instance, like there's 24-hour, AA meetings that you can find on Facebook. So, I just encourage people that, of course, in person is better if you can do it for most people, but that's not even true for everybody. And it gives people access, So, yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. And getting support from people who are, struggling with similar issues is incredibly powerful. I mean, there's a lot of very successful programs that don't have any, hired therapists or whatever running them. They're just run by, not just, but like they are run by the people who have, who are in recovery, who've recovered themselves, and they're helping others. And there's no evidence that that's not just as effective as programs that are run by, people like me, so, open up a lot of doors by, not feeling like, you can't do anything about it until you, find the right therapist. And, maybe you won't even end up needing it. Who knows?
No, I like that you've, shared a lot of different avenues, resources. I think that's really helpful. And one of the things that I am curious about.
Oh, and one more thing
Sorry,
is,
yes, go ahead.
sorry. Look for ways that you can get involved in your community. That's really key. If you can help other people, you probably are going to start to feel better. And so sometimes we forget that when people come to us for help, we forget that, they're also, potentially bringing help to others. So, that often is a huge thing that helps people to make progress.
So I hear that you're saying, thank you, Ben, share that was very helpful. All your questions. Absolutely, Ben. Thank you for your comments. Glad for your participation tonight. One of the things that I love what you're saying, Kathy, is it's so true. You want to feel good, do good. And it's like something about it. So I imagine there's some tons of research that people that are connected socially, that are involved in volunteering, do a lot better, that are more resilient with their mental health. So I love
and
that.
And they live longer, and they're healthier in their physical health as well.
So I think I think this is what we want to focus on towards the end, because we want to leave on a positive note. I want to touch one negative thing, and then we'll go back to this positive, making a difference in your community, be involved, make the planet better. What can you do? We're going to get back there. That's where we're going to end, because we don't want to do this all night. We want to then connect online or offline with our family and friends, dogs, whatever, cats. But while we're here, I think the most important thing next to the opiates is the suicide thing. Because the one thing that I'm always curious about, like, is these people that commit suicide and they're like, I was just with her just yesterday. She was laughing. I don't get that. Now, could we figure that out through AI if there was algorithms?
Sure. I mean, AI is a great tool to, to highlight, risks if you have the right data to feed into it. Absolutely. But it's not going to solve the problem. Okay. I mean, it's a tool, right? So the thing about suicide is that sometimes like a desire to die is very fleeting. Typically, it doesn't last very long unless you're, in a situation where, you literally like don't expect to have any quality of life left. Like if you're terminally ill or whatever, it's a situational response. It feels like for that moment, like things couldn't get better, but typically, when a person is asked, like, what were you, were you upset that you survived? Usually they'll say no.
Mhm.
Like, I mean,
Mhm.
they weren't disappointed. Sometimes they were, but that means, they just have a lot of work to do to continue to make progress. So the main thing about like suicidal thinking and suicidal behaviors is to have a really good safety plan so that when that happens, that you're in a place that will protect you long enough so that you can safely be back home in your community.
And
Okay.
what is that timeline? What is the typical
It is
timeline?
typically a couple days, it could be longer. I mean, there could be people who, long term, are on suicide watch if, maybe if they're like in prison or if they have, severe, long-term mental illness that tends to, create periods of, very severe depression that's very, intractable and stuff. And I mean, we even have things to help with that. So, but typically the timeline is going to be very brief. Most of the time, if people are in a psychiatric hospital, they tend to be back home within a couple days. The important thing is to, have a good plan. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. Know who you're going to call. Make sure that you do not have any firearms anywhere in your residence or in any place that you visit that you could access. So if you have any suicidal kind of thinking, you don't want to have any firearms around you anywhere. Okay. You want them to be just, give them, the police will hold them for you, or maybe, a friend or whatever. Okay. But during that time, it's just because that is the one thing that, like, if you get that impulse and it's there, you're probably not going to make it, honestly. Like,
Mhm. That's
and,
that's that's good to know. But how about the signs and symptoms? There's these
mhm.
individuals that showed no sign when you asked loved ones, people that were with them, and they just had no. I mean, tell us about that. How can we be on the lookout, not to be like overly off the wall, but what are the signs and symptoms that loved ones can be aware of to prevent suicide?
So typically, what you'll see is a pattern of behavior where people tend to kind of isolate and shut down. Um, and they get more like kind of like hopeless and despondent. They may make some statements. They may, start saying that, nobody really needs me. And, you know, um, they may start like giving away things, or alternately it may be that somebody that's been really depressed, all of a sudden they seem weirdly kind of calm and happy, like like they've kind of got a load off their shoulders, but it's not like they're better. It's like, okay, what's going on? I mean, the truth is that, like, families, they typically know something about that person's processes that are going on, but there are times when they will keep it a secret completely, and there's sometimes when you just can't know. There's absolutely nothing that you could have done, quite frankly. It's just the reality of it.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't always prevent it, but you want to prevent it in any way you can. So the main thing is, if you or a family member has that issue where might be at risk of suicide, is to work with a professional who can help you to develop your own safety plan, where you can
Mhm.
understand your own, the changes and the signs for yourself that you might not want to tell anybody else.
Mhm.
But by having it and kind of going over it, you might feel a little more comfortable with admitting when it's starting to happen, and feeling less afraid of, feeling like, if you feel like people are going to take your control away and try to, you know, lock you up or whatever,
Mhm.
that's hard. But if you feel like, okay, we want to work with you so that you can have control over the process, right? And that you can have a plan and we're going to
Mhm.
work together. And, you just kind of want
Yeah.
to like take away some of that fear and anxiety around it, and make sure that the person understands that, that you're there for them, and that, it's not the end of the world. Like, you can get through this. We're
Yeah.
going to help you to get to the point where this isn't happening anymore.
Well, Kathy, I really appreciate you touching that subject, and we will definitely put information on our newsletter about resources, all these
Yeah.
topics we're discussing, because we want to be of service and help people. That's the main thing. The other
It's
thing
never
is,
it's never not no, it's never not okay to call 911 or to call, the suicide hotline or go to the emergency room. If you have,
yeah.
any concern or doubt, that's always, okay to do. Even if it doesn't turn out to be necessary, it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Okay, so and I guess what you're saying also is if mention any sort of thing that people say anything or refer to anything, it's like take that seriously.
Take
If
it
there's
seriously. I
okay,
mean,
yeah,
like it
yeah,
doesn't mean that they necessarily need to be taken to the hospital, but like
yeah,
look into it,
yeah.
don't just blow it off, right?
And so we're getting to our latter. We're sort of winding down. We have a few more minutes, so let's end on a positive note about the community, the planet, making it a
Mhm.
great place. What can we do from Kathy, your perspective as a therapist? How can we live productive, happy, healthy lives?
So I think the most important thing that we need to do is we need to realize that, we are social beings, right?
Hmm.
That we, you know, the way that we interact with each other, it's not like, one person has to be to blame for everything, right? We can understand that you know, things are connected, that maybe if your child is having problems, maybe don't think that like you can't help them by by being part of their lives, by connecting with them. Don't give up, don't feel like things are never going to get better. Don't give in to all the doom and gloom and this belief that our country is hopelessly divided and things will never get better. Like you've got to believe that. I mean think about it. We've come through many crises, right? Human
Hmm.
beings have come through many crises. We've managed to cover the entire planet with our with our species. So like we can do this. Like we can get through the next phase in our evolution. We can work together. We can find a way to do it where we're not living in some kind of, totalitarian hell, or we're not, kind of devolving back into like, living on the land as,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean,
Well,
that we can do
what
it together.
what I would say the takeaway that you gave me and you inspired me through this talk, what I learned was volunteer, get involved. I don't care how big it is or
That's
how
absolutely
small it
right.
is, like just like local, think, be global, but think local, grow a garden and maybe invite
Right.
some kindergartners or whatever over to learn about plants and your neighbor or have a picnic. I mean, it's just
Yeah, talk
it's
to people.
yeah,
Don't like rule people out just because they think differently from you. Don't assume the worst of people. Try to find ways to connect and
yeah,
to let people know that, we are still, we're still here. We're still, Americans, we're still, human beings. I don't care who you are, but people are generally good at heart.
yeah.
Like that's what they want to be. You got to have some faith, whether you're a religious person or not a religious person. You've just got to believe, in the goodness of human beings, and that deep down, that you also have that within you. You have to have that belief and, find people that reinforce that in you.
I like that. So we're going to end that you got to have faith and you got to have belief, you got to have hope, and life is worth living. And so, anyway,
Absolutely.
this is awesome. So glad you made it here, and you you made it, and you showed up, and we had community. We shared a little bit. We learned from you, Kathy. Thank you so much.
And thank you. It was fun.
Have a great evening. Now we can go on to our non-virtual world. Take care, everyone.
Okay.